So I will begin with Babur, which is how the Mughal dynasty began and how I began also in terms of writing about the Mughals. It happened, like I was telling Sukhi before this talk, began completely by chance and coincidence, and it's a fairly long story. But the main part of it is that the where I worked at the time, my boss had a copy of the Babur Nama, which he brought into the office, and I started reading it. And I remember I was reading it on my way back home. I was in the metro coming back and I was just sort of flipping through it. I wasn't expecting anything particularly exciting. I thought, some names, some dates, some battle, something like that. But, within a few pages, I find this little paragraph about Umar Sheikh, who is Babur's father. And about him, Babur says that Umar Sheikh was short in stature, had a round beard and a fleshy face, and was fat. That is, he was a bit roly-poly chap. He wore his tunic so tight that to fasten the ties, he had to hold in his stomach. And if he let himself go, it often happened that the ties broke. So the laces of his tunic would snap. And I thought this was such a fantastic sort of little image, and that's what started me writing for children about with that sort of image of his buttons popping. And I think we can maybe surmise from what Babur goes on to say that these laces popping happen more often than not. Because, while Umar Sheikh was, by Babur's account, a very much a devout and orthodox Muslim, he says, he used to pray 5 times a day. If he missed a prayer, he would make it up. He often recited the Quran. But there was no fundamental contradiction between that and him enjoying a great gala drinking party. So he used to drink a lot, says Babur. Later in life, he held drinking parties once or twice a week. He was fun to be with in gathering and was good at reciting poetry for his companions. So it was this. He was a convivial man. Uh, Babur himself didn't actually have a drink until he was about 30 years old. But this is not because he didn't want to. He talks about when he's about 23, he's in Herat, and he goes to this party held by his cousin, one Muzaffar Mirza. Everyone is drinking, and everyone is drinking, Babur says, gulping down the clear wine as though it was the water of life. And Babur himself is quite tempted. He's never been drunk, and he says, my heart was urging me to cross that valley. And then he goes on to say that, as a child, Omar Sheikh had perhaps offered him a sip of wine, but he had refused. And the thing is, of course, that Omar Sheikh died when Babur was still very much a child, he was 11 or 12 years old, right? And so he was not around when Babur grew up. And he says, when, during my young manhood, when I had an inclination for wine, nobody offered. No one even knew that I was interested. And perhaps you can see this may have maybe partly the consequence of not having a father, because it might have been Umar Sheikh who would have introduced him to the wine. But anyway, Babur doesn't drink. He feels like drinking at Muzaffar Mirza's. He doesn't. The next day or a few days later, he goes to another party at Muzaffar Mirza's elder brother's house. There again, everyone is drinking around him. But again, Babur is a little shy. Instead, though, we have this painting here. He is eating a roast goose. This was also a new experience for him. He had never sort of carved a goose before himself. Then in the Babur Nama, about 10 years are missing. We have, the chapters are not there. When we meet him again, Babur has evidently started drinking, and he is quite an impressive drinker. And this is an account of from 1519, when Babur is about 36, of a drinking party. He says, at midday, we rode off on an excursion, got on a boat, and drank spirits. We drank on the boat until late that night, left the boat roaring drunk, and got on our horses. I took a torch in my hand and, reeling to one side and then the other, let the horse gallop free-reined along the river bank all the way to the camp. So this is really drunk driving on a horse. And I suppose the advantage is that, unlike a car, the horse itself was sober. So he reached the camp. And when I got there, he says, I must have been very drunk. The next morning, they told me I had come galloping into camp holding a torch. I didn't remember a thing. except then when I got to my tent, I vomited a lot. This is a painting of Babur returning to the camp in his drunken state. And what is lovely about this painting is that you can see he's in white, and that white is the painter's way of showing how Babur was riding through the moonlit night. That is, he's bathed in moonlight. Uh, Now, by this time, when this drinking party happens, Babur was in Kabul. He was the king of Kabul. And Kabul was home to two of the other things in terms of eating and drinking that Babur very much enjoyed. One was fruit. Kabul was a mercantile center, as Babur says. It was a hub of trade, right? And so much so that many Kabul merchants would think that a 300% or a 400% profit was not enough. They would complain about it. So you had all kinds of fruit available in Kabul, from grapes, pomegranates, apricots, apples, quinces, pears, peaches, plums, jujubes, almonds, nuts, and including tropical fruits like oranges, citrus, sugarcane, jalboza, and honey. And the other thing that Babur loved in Kabul very much was his garden. He called Bagh-e-Wafa. This is a painting of him supervising the laying out of his garden. It overlooked a river. It was planted with all kinds of fruit trees, including orange, citrus, pomegranate, even banana and sugar cane, which had come from elsewhere. He describes it with great love. The ground is high, with constant running water, and the weather is mild in winter. In the southwest portion of the garden is a 10 by 10 pool, surrounded by orange trees and some pomegranate trees. All around the pool is clover meadow. The best place in the garden is there. When the oranges turn yellow, it is a beautiful sight. And this is what he came from. This he arrived to the hot and dusty plains of northern India, to Hindustan. And actually, when he comes here, he puts it very simply and clearly. He says it is a strange country. He says, compared to ours, it is another world. And some of you may be aware of this, but when he starts writing about Hindustan, he gives it this famously 1-star rating that he gives to India. He says it is a place of little charm. There is no beauty in its people, no graceful social intercourse, no poetic talent or understanding, no etiquette, nobility or manliness. There are no good horses, meat, grapes, melons, or other fruit. There is no ice, cold water, good food, or bread in the markets. So he's missing not only the fruits and food that he's accustomed to, but also the sort of convivial picnic setting of sitting and chatting and talking. And his begs, his commanders, many of them agree. And many of them want to leave, and some of them insist on leaving, and Babur doesn't stop them. One of them is the man called Khwaja Kalam, who, when he leaves behind a little line of graffiti, a poetry on his quarters, on the walls of his quarters in Delhi. And it says, if I cross the Indus in safety, may my face turn black if I ever desire to see Hindustan again. Babur is not at all amused by this cheeky behavior, so he sends him a verse in reply. And the verse is, give 100 thanks, Babur, that the generous pardoner of all, that is God, has given you Sindh and Hind and a vast kingdom. If you cannot endure the heat and say, I would see the face of cold, there is Ghazni. But still, so Babur stays, despite all his longings, and he tries to recreate his gardens and his bathhouses in Agra. Where he does that, in fact, local people refer to that area as a little Kabul. To make things worse for himself, Babur decides to give up drinking. And we know, I think many people know the story that when he was going to battle Rana Sanga, he gave up, he broke all his wine cups and distributed them. And this was, as a way of instilling a fervor among his troops, giving the whole battle a more religious sort of flavor in order to get them more excited about battling. What we don't know, though, is that Babur deeply regretted having given up drinking. So some years later, he would write again to that same Khwaja Kalam. He would write to him this lovely little line of poetry. He says, while others repent and make vow to abstain, I have vowed to abstain, and repentant am I. As soon, he said, he continues in that letter, as soon as Hindustan is settled, he says, I will come back and visit Kabul, because he says, how can one forget the pleasures of that country? Especially when abstaining from drinking, how can one allow oneself to forget the licit pleasure of melons and grapes? Recently, he says, a melon was brought to me, and as I cut it and ate it, I was oddly affected. I wept the whole time that I was eating it. And then he goes on, 2 years ago, he says, the craving for a wine party was so overwhelming that many times, out of longing for wine, I was on the verge of weeping. With whom, he says, do you hold parties? With whom do you drink wine? So we leave Babur now in his sort of lonely home in Agra. Because he died soon after coming here. He was hardly here for a few years, so less than five. And we get to Humayun. Now, Humayun's, story generally, as we know it, is one of exile and hardship. But, he managed to get in an astonishing number of parties into his life. And one of the most interesting ones is one that is thrown at the beginning of his reign by Khanzada Begum, who is his aunt, Babur's older sister. So when Humayun becomes the Padishah, she suggests that he should have a party. He says, why don't you organize it for me? And she does. So, and Gulbadan, Humayun's sister, describes how Khanzada and Humayun are both sitting on the divan at the head of that gathering. She's not the only woman at this party. There are, in fact, 96 begums in total. Including two very intriguing characters, two princesses called Shad Begum and Mihir Angez Begum, both who are granddaughters of one Sultan Hussain Mirza. They are great friends. They used to wear men's clothes, it seems. They played polo and were great archers and musicians. Now, within a decade of wearing the crown of Hindustan, Humayun loses it. He is chased out by Sher Shah Suri. He finds himself in Rajasthan with hardly a drop of water to drink. Ironically, his water bearer, Johar, who's with him, writes about how the journey is horrid. And one particular leg of it, they march 27 hours without any water. And thirst is not, a sentiment or a feeling that ennobles. It does not bring out the best in Humayun. Finally, when they do find a pond, Humayun is sort of riding his horse towards it. He finds a Mongol merchant lying on the ground, half, faint. He's so tired, so weak, he can't even go to the water. Now, as it happens, Humayun owes this man a lot of money. And so Humayun says to him, okay, I will bring you all the water that you want if you cancel my debt. And the poor merchant, what can he do except to agree? So he agrees. But again, Humayun, because, we have this idea of the man as sort of sentimental and forever giving in to his brothers and losing his throne, etc., etc. But he was a canny chap and he was a sharp operator. So he calls three people to witness this deed, and he says that so the merchant repeats it, and then only then does he get a drink of water. Food is almost as precious as water on this journey. Jawhar tells of this again, sort of a memorable incident when they are camped. Again, they found a little lake. They're camped by it, and a deer comes running by. And everyone is very excited at the prospect of eating this deer. Humayun gets on his horse to hunt it. The deer jumps into the lake. And Jawhar, with great presence of mind, goes jumping in after. And with even greater presence of mind, he calls out that 1/4 of this is mine if you catch it. And Humayun agrees. And so Jawhar swims up to the deer, holds on to it until Humayun manages to shoot it. Lack of food is bad, but abundant food could also be equally dangerous. And this they discovered because Humayun and Hamida traveled from Rajasthan, and then they find themselves exiled again in Iran, in the land of Shah Tahmasp. And Shah Tahmasp is a man who ascends the throne at about 12. He rules for about 50 years. A man of very strong character, very strong opinion, very much the opposite of Humayun. And from whatever little whatever little you read of it, you can feel that the few months that Humayun spent there must have been amongst the most unnerving of his life, because you can never tell what the Shah was up to. On the one hand, he offers Humayun this abundant hospitality. There is a letter of instruction that he sent to the governor of Herat, who's the same place where Babur almost had a drink. And the Shah is detailing the reception arrangements for Humayun. And he stipulates 100 horses with golden saddles, 400 suits of velvet and brocade, 500 dishes made every day, including bread kneaded with milk, marmalades of mashad apples and grapes, halwa, puddings, molasses, Chinese noodles scented with ambergris, all to be served on porcelain, gold, and silver, with sharbats cooled with snow and ice. He orders bazaars laid out in the city gardens and entertainments on the city streets. These would include women engaging in pleasant conversation with comers and goers, perfumed bathhouses, plush carpets, tents with brocade, on and on and on the list goes. And yet, at the same time, that he's sort of this shock and awe hospitality is accompanied by some kind of anger on the Shah's part, so much so that it is said that he was almost at one point on the verge of wanting to have Humayun killed. And there are many stories for why he wanted to do this. One of them is that they were having dinner together, Humayun and Shah Tahmasp, and the Shah was hectoring Humayun. We love to give him lectures, telling him what he did wrong, how he should have, what he should have done, what he shouldn't have done. And at this point, he was telling him that he had been too indulgent of his brothers. And as they finished eating, Shah Tahmasp summons his own brother, who's called Behram, and Behram's duty was to bring the basin and the water in which for the Shah to wash his hands after eating. So Behram brings the water and the basin, and the Shah is washing his hands, and he says to Humayun, see, this is how you should treat your younger brothers. And Humayun agrees, and Humayun agrees with such enthusiasm, in fact, that Behram is, and quite justifiably, offended. And so it seems Behram started plotting to get the Shah to kill him. Fortunately for Humayun, he had come with some jewels. He had some rubies. He had a very big diamond. Some people say it may have been the Kohinoor, which he presented to Shah Tahmasp. The Shah's mood improved. They had more sort of reciprocal parties. The Humayun even had a Hindustani banquet for the Shah, in which the sort of the pièce de résistance, the star dish was dal huska, which is a sort of dal made with rice. And the Shah eventually gave him the army that he needed to go back to Kandahar, to Kabul. Now, when Humayun was in the desert in Rajasthan and they didn't have any water to drink, partly it was because it's a desert and water had to come by. Partly it was because the ruler of Marwar, Maldev, had his men ride out and fill some of the wells with sand. And he had done this because he wanted to punish Humayun, because he said that some of his men had hunted cattle. They had killed cows and buffaloes. And he said, that this is not allowed in Hindu areas. And so you must take the consequences for what your men have done. And what is ironic about it is that Humayun himself would have thought of, hunting or eating cow meat as a sign of acute desperation. And we know this because later on, now with the help of the Shah's troops, he comes back, he comes to Kandahar, and he then eventually takes Kabul. And he comes in, it happens to be Ramzan, so he has been fasting the whole day. In the evening, he's quite hungry, and he asks for food. And it's Jauhar again who goes to the quarters of one of his stepmothers, one of Babur's widows, who says, of course, and she sends him some dinner. What she sends him is a broth and a meat and vegetable curry. Both of these are made of beef. And when this is laid down in front of him, Humayun is horrified. And he says, oh, unfortunate Kamran. Kamran is the younger brother who had held Kabul until Humayun took it from him. Oh, unfortunate Kamran, was this the mode of your existence? And did you feed Babur's widow? Did you feed her on the flesh of cows? What? Could you not afford to keep a few goats for her subsistence? What? Could not we, his 4 sons, support her as he did? In fact, he's so dismayed by this unfitting meal that he doesn't eat a bite. He just drinks some sharbat and he goes to sleep.
Before you move on, I just want to know, there's a question, are we on the right slide, or will you be,
No, we're on the right side. I will get to that. I apologize. I don't have too many pictures, but so when I get to the next one, let me shift it anyway.
Not a problem.
This is actually here. This is Humayun and Hamida reunited in Kabul, and that is young Akbar with them. This Kabul that they are in, goes back and forth between the brothers, between Humayun and Kamran, for the next decade and more. But, life has to go on, right? And you get a lovely sense of this from at one point when Humayun has been wanting, he's planning a sort of a march on bulk. For all this entire time that he's away, for most of it, he's actually forgotten about in Hindustan. He doesn't think there's any way he can come back here. He's thinking of going north, back towards Samarkand, and he will try and do that by first taking bulk, right? And so he's planning a march on bulk. Meanwhile, the ladies in the family are far more interested in an expedition to a hill nearby, a meadow, which will flower with this kind of medicinal shrub, which is called rivas. And so the Begum said to the emperor over and over again, the rivers will be coming up, the rivers will be coming up, shall we go? So finally he says, okay, I'm going to go on this march to Balkh. We'll all go together. On the way, we'll stop and see this shrub in bloom. And it's a little bit of a shambolic sort of departure because as they leave, one of the ladies, her horse falls on in a stream, and she falls with it, so they're delayed for 1 hour. Another of the ladies, her horse was climbing up a hill, so it's all sort of getting a bit chaotic. Humayun is getting a headache. He says to them, "All of you go on, and I will follow when I have taken some opium and got over my annoyance." He joined us later. So this is Gulbadan is writing, his sister. He joined us when we had, as he ordered, gone on a bit. The look of vexation was entirely laid aside, and he came with a happy and beautiful look on his face. And that night, they all spent together in the same tent because one of the things that's happened is that the Begum's tents have not arrived, so they all sleep together, wives, sisters, all of them, aunts, talking and telling stories and singing softly, softly, as Gulbadan says. Again, the next day he wants to go off in the morning, early morning. He wants to leave to see this, these rivers fields. But the women are not ready. So Gulbadan is sent to tell them and say, hurry up, hurry up. But they take their time getting dressed. By the time they come, the sun is high up in the sky. He says, now we can't go. We'll have to go later on in the evening. But finally, after 2 days of all this kind of trips and falls, they managed to see the fields. We went to the skirt of the hills, and when it was evening, we walked about. Tents and pavilions were pitched on the spot, and here His Majesty came and stayed. Here too, we passed the nights together in sociable talk, and of course, in eating. There was, sheep and milk and all kinds of foods that was organized. Men too, could bond over a meal. There is another sort of little story from when Kamran and Humayun are reconciled. This would also happen in between fights; they would be reconciled. And so Kamran, Humayun, and the younger brothers Askari, Hindal, and then they have a cousin called Suleiman. The five of them meet and they form a kind of fellowship. Again, the idea is that they will march on Balkh together. And as a way of cementing this fellowship, Humayun says, "Bring ewer and basin so that we may wash our hands in the same basin and eat together from the same flour." Now, since Suleiman, the cousin, is the eldest, they offer him the basin first. But Suleiman is not from Kabul, he's from Badakhshan, so he may not be used for the sort of courtly fashions. So, again, this is Gulbadan telling the story. After washing his hands, Mirza Suleiman did something improper with his nose. I'm guessing he blew his nose in the water basin. At this, the younger brothers, Askari and Hindal, are really disgusted, and they say, "What rusticity is this? First of all, what right have we to wash our hands in His Majesty's presence? But when he bestows the favor and gives the order, we cannot change it. What sense is there in these nose-wagging performances?" So they leave and they go and wash their hands elsewhere. Poor Mirza Suleiman was very much ashamed, but then they come back and they eat from the same tablecloth. Mirza Suleiman, as it happened, was the only one of these five who remained alive to actually see Akbar, what Akbar would go on to achieve after them, and not in bulk, of course, we know in Hindustan. And it was Akbar, after these two false starts of Babur and Humayun, who actually built the Mughal Empire. And this means something more than just conquest. It means bringing this vast region from the ports of Gujarat to the ports of Bengal, from Kashmir all the way down to Burhanpur in Madhya Pradesh. It bringing all this area under a kind of unified administration with a kind of stable administrative structure, which then, of course, allows for easier trade, greater wealth, and the availability of a great variety of foods in the market, both on its table and in the market. In modern terms, the Mughal Empire is a kind of superpower, and it's something that I've noticed whenever I have traveled to richer countries. You go into the smallest supermarket in the smallest town, and you will find, food and drink from all over the world is spread out in front of you. And exactly this that Jesuit priest who travels to Akbar's fort, Father Montserrat, notes when he goes to Lahore's Bazar. He says that every kind of imported merchandise was available, every kind of art or craft useful to human life was being practiced there. There was also, of course, besides all the trade and the food, there was also the abundance of the land itself. And more than one European calls it the fatness of the land. There is a priest called Terry who arrives during Jahangir's reign. And he says the land abounds in singular good wheat, rice, barley, and diverse other kinds of grain to make bread, and an abundance of other good provisions to eat it with. There were fruits of all kinds: melons, mangoes, orange, dates, grapes, figs, and Terry's favorite was the ananas, the pineapple, which he describes as a pleasing compound made of strawberries, claret wine, rose water, and sugar, well tempered together. Meat is equally plentiful. The cow is, of course, you cannot. It's forbidden to kill the cow, but it is substituted by buffalo, which Terry says is like beef but not so wholesome. But other than that, it is as infinite as needless to write of their geese, ducks, pigeons, partridges, quails, peacocks, and many such singular good fowl bought at such easy rates as I have seen a good mutton sold for the value of 1 shilling, one hare for the value of a penny. And you don't even have to pay that much if you were to choose to hunt your own food, because he says, Terry continues, the whole kingdom is as it were a forest. For a man can travel nowhere, but he will see deer, hares, fish, and fowl, and they are every man's game. And this abundance of food in the empire is reflected in the abundance of food on Akbar's table. As Abul Fazl describes it, Abul Fazl is the author of the Akbar Nama. Here he is presenting a copy of it to Akbar. Abul Fazl describes how 100-odd dishes would arrive in a grand procession of gold, silver, and copper dishes, prepared by chefs from all countries, cooked with water from the Yamuna Chenab, mixed with rainwater, and always with a few drops of Ganga water added to it. And also Akbar only ever drank water from the Ganga. Abul Fazl classifies the cuisine into three broad types. There is Sufiana, that is devoid of meat, which might include zard birinj, that is rice cooked with sugar, ghee, almonds, pistachios, raisins, ginger, saffron, and cinnamon. Khichdi, which is rice and moong dal cooked in ghee. Halwa, green saag, which is one of the most pleasant dishes according to Abul Fazl. If it wasn't one of Akbar's vegetarian days, the rice might also be cooked with meat to make a kabuli or a pulao or a halim or an extravagant dish called bugra, which was made of meat, flour, ghee, gram, sugar, vinegar, onions, carrots, beets, turnips, spinach, fennel, saffron, ginger, cloves, cardamom, cumin, cinnamon, and round pepper. Finally, there would be meat cooked on its own. You could have kebab, you could have a whole sheep, you could have a deboned fowl stuffed with minced meat, eggs, ghee, onions, coriander, ginger, saffron, and pepper to make a delicious sambar. Then there was an endless variety of chutneys and pickles made of mango, lemon, turnip or carrot, apple, peach or raisins, cucumber, bamboo, brinjal or mustard, along with curd or green salads, ginger, limes, and of course bread, of which I think Abul Fazl speaks for the entire subcontinent when he says that a chapati tastes very well when it is served hot. And yet, at the same time, given this huge abundance of food, Abul Fazl also says that Akbar's lofty mind and disposition was such that the question, what dinner has been prepared today, never passes over his tongue. That is, Akbar is not interested in food. He would eat only once a day. He would begin his meal with milk or curd, and end with a prayer. He would give away a portion to the poor before he began eating, and he would always stop eating before he was entirely full. This, abundance on Akbar's table, and along with the insistence on his frugality, I think mirrors maybe something of the abundance of food in India versus, the traditionally ascetic and solitary dining customs that were prevalent among some people and some categories of people. Again, we have some European travelers a little bit later, one Dutch man called Francisco Palsat, who's writing about Hindu eating habits. He says, among the Banyas of Gujarat, there are innumerable sects, one of which will not eat or drink with another. He says again, there are many sects of Khatris, but they are somewhat bolder or less strict in their beliefs. They can eat goat or sheep's flesh, and indeed they also drink, but only in private. But many others, he says, will not eat of anything that has been alive, not even green plants, but only rice, wheat, and butter. He goes on to say that the Hindus are much stricter than the Muslims in their ceremonies. No one will omit to wash the body in the morning, and they will not touch food till they have washed. They sit down to eat naked with their head inside a well marked enclosure, which no one enters while they are eating. If they are disturbed, they will give up that meal. Now, European travelers are notoriously inaccurate. They do not have full access to information. But I think generally you can see, I think we are still familiar with the ideas of purity and restrictions that govern eating in some parts of India still. In fact, another visitor, again during the Jahangir's time, the ambassador Thomas Roe from England, would discover how hard it was to get any Indian from the nobility to eat with him. Once, towards the end of his reign, Asif Khan, who was Noor Jahan's brother and Jahangir's brother-in-law, invited Roe for dinner. And the evening was very pleasant. There was lots of food, there was lots of drink. But Asif Khan would not eat with his guests. And Roe doesn't say anything. He only notes in his diary that they eat not willingly with us. And he knew this because he'd been around for a while. An earlier time that he also recounts, he was invited by one Mir Jamaluddin Hussain. And again, Mir Jamaluddin would not eat with him. And at that time, Roe had protested. He had said, without you, I'm not hungry. So embarrassed, Mir Jamaluddin had sat down, eaten a few nuts, but then quickly excused himself and left. A few days later, Roe returned the invitation. He called Mir Jamaluddin to his own home. And again, the poor Jamaluddin was clearly uncomfortable. He had a few sort of gingerly bites, and only from those dishes that he said he was assured had been cooked by a Muslim cook. But as he was leaving, Jamaluddin turned to the ambassador and asked him if he could send some of that food to his house. He'd had some baked meats made, and Jamaluddin had never seen any such thing. And he wanted to taste them, but he wanted to taste them in private. And maybe there is a clue here, in Mir Jamaluddin's secret curiosity about the links between food, purity, and hierarchy as it was playing out in Hindustan. Because it was not so much what one ate, but that there were certain things that one did not eat, and that there were certain people that one did not eat with that defined your relative hierarchy in the world. And this is the world that Akbar is assimilating into, where he's come, unlike Babur, who came when he was 40 in his 40s, Akbar arrived when he was 12 or 13 years old. So his childhood was spent in Kabul, but most of his life was spent here. And he's grown up with the customs of Hindustan, and he has grown up deeply influenced by specifically Rajput customs, because he's not just, some of them are his very highest commanders, his closest friends, and also his in-laws. His first son Salim is half Rajput. So he has, some of the things that he really loves about Hindustan are, first of all, elephants. And since we're talking about food, Akbar's favorite elephants, he had khas or special elephants. They also had a special diet of sugar, ghee, milk, and rice cooked with cloves and chilies. Rajput also sort of grew his hair to fit in with Rajput customs. We know this because at one point he had an epileptic fit before a hunting expedition. And so he cancelled the hunt, and he did various sort of ceremonies. And one of the things he did was he ordered a haircut for himself. And he said at that point that when I came here, I grew my hair out of sympathy with the people of India, but now I would like them to follow my custom, which is to have short hair. Another thing that he absorbs from the Rajputs is this idea of honor as it is invested in women, because as we've seen earlier with Gul Badan and all the sort of parties and the picnics that used to happen, traditionally the Mughal women were very much part of the public world. But it is not the case with the Rajput women, and so Akbar. It is during his time that Akbar actually transformed the idea of the harem. Before was a kind of collective noun for the various royal women. In Akbar's time is when he turns it into a physical location where the women are kept and guarded from the outside world. And in fact, Akbar becomes sort of this idea of female chastity and all of that plays so much clearly in his mind that even in the Akbar Nama, the senior women are never named. So his mother Hamida Banu is called Maryam Makhani. His wife, and this is why there's so much confusion about Jodhabai or not Jodhabai. Her name was never Jodhabai, but you won't know this from the Akbar Nama because there she's only referred to as Maryam ul Zamani, never by her real name. Akbar also adopts the idea of offering pan as a way of offering honor to somebody. There's a lovely little story actually of Man Singh and Rana Pratap. Man Singh is one of Akbar's highest commanders. Rana Pratap is somebody that Akbar is embroiled with throughout his life, and Man Singh goes to Rana Pratap to sort of negotiate with him, and he served a meal, but Rana Pratap won't eat with him. He sends his young son, Amar Singh, to eat with him. And Man Singh is very sort of unhappy by this. He said, "Why won't you eat with me?" And Rana Pratap sends a message that he cannot eat with somebody whose women are married to a Turk and who probably eats with him too. So, Man Singh is not somebody that Rana Pratap can bring himself to eat with. Man Singh, of course, is as proud as his host. He gets up, he says, "I'm leaving." Various insults are exchanged. And the ground where Man Singh's meal was set is then washed with Ganga water. And all the people who are assembled, they all go and have baths and change their clothes. So impure is Man Singh said to be. And on the other hand, you have Amrit Rai, who is the author bard of the Man Charit, which is a sort of epic poem about Man Singh, who talks about how before the Battle of Haldighati, Akbar called a council of his generals and he asked for volunteers to go and fight Rana Pratap. And Man Singh volunteers. And for this, Akbar offers him pan. And there's a scholar who has written about how this offering of pan is kind of incorporation of, she says, the vassal into the body politic. Or, to put it another way, Man Singh is shunned by Rana Pratap, who will not eat with him, and he becomes one with Akbar by, taking that pan. So, how does Akbar's sort of vegetarianism fit into all of this? We are today, thankfully, at the end of a very long election season. All kinds of weird things have been said during the course of it. One of them, I don't know, it was a while ago, you may or may not remember, but was the Prime Minister saying that, the opposition had a Mughal mindset because they were eating meat. Publicly eating meat. And what is ironic about it is that the man who actually built the Mughal Empire, Akbar himself, would really go out of his way to emphasize his dislike for meat. Once he said, "Whenever I ordered animal food to be cooked for me, I found it rather tasteless and cared little for it." Another time he says, "It is not right that a man should make his stomach the grave of animals." In fact, such is his contempt for meat eaters that he thought they would fall on themselves and eat their own flesh if it wasn't for the pain. Then he goes on piously, "Would that my own body was so vigorous as to be of service to meat eaters so that they could forego other animal life." Once he's camped in Punjab, he calls all the people around him and gives them a little lecture on vegetarianism to try to wean them away from their wolfish habits. And he says, "If the robe of worldliness were not over our shoulders, we should abstain from eating meat entirely." Already at this time, Akbar was vegetarian on Fridays. Later on, this vegetarianism would expand. And I don't know if some of you may or may not be fans of Calvin and Hobbes. If you are, you may know of Calvin Ball, which is a game that Calvin invents, and the rules of it are get invented as it is played. And Akbar's vegetarian fasts remind me a little bit of Calvin Ball, because so starts off with he would not eat on Fridays, then he would not eat meat on Sundays, then he would not eat meat on the first day of every solar month, on solar and lunar eclipses, on the day between two fasts, and through the whole month of Fawardin, which is the first month of the Persian calendar. The month of his birth, the whole month was vegetarian. But when Akbar's age exceeded the number of days in that month, that is when he was over 30 years old, he would add a vegetarian day, day by day, to the weeks that followed. On top of this, every year Akbar would try to extend his vegetarian days by at least five. So it's not surprising that there was a whole department of officers who was in charge of keeping track of Akbar's abstinence. Uh, Akbar's own sort of devoted servants and his subjects were encouraged and, in fact, sometimes compelled to join him in his vegetarianism. It was one of the vows that people took when they became disciples of his in Deen Ilahi. The oaths that they took was that they would try to become vegetarian, they would not eat meat during the months of their birthdays, and they would not eat from the same vessels as butchers, bird catchers, and fishermen. Uh, his aversion extended even to prohibiting any kind of animal slaughter across the land. And there's a Jain inscription in Gujarat that says that a Jain teacher actually persuaded Akbar to ban animal slaughter for a full 6 months across the land. And this, was not obviously. This is a beautiful painting of a Jain monk that was painted in Akbar's court. Um, and as one historian puts it, many families were ruined by this kind of orders. But what was going on in his head when he was doing this? It may be because Akbar, part of his sort of idea of himself as a ruler was also of him as a divinely ordained king, but divinely ordained for all faiths. So the period of Akbar's rule is also the period of the end of the first Islamic millennium, when a last Mahdi, a final Messiah, is supposed to come to the earth. And many flatterers in his court begin to suggest that it might be Akbar. And Akbar certainly, it seems, begins to believe that it might be him. His Hindu courtiers are not to be left behind, also suggest that he's an incarnation of Vishnu, like Ram or Krishna. And that he is he's come to earth to fulfill a prediction of a great conqueror who would rise up in India, who would honor Brahmins and cows and govern the earth with justice. There are many other sort of praises that are showered on Akbar of this kind. So a poet called Holrai calls him Hindupati, Lord of the Hindus. Another Jain monk called Siddhi Chandra compares him to Kaushalya's son, that is to Ram. Amrit Rai, that same the author of the Mancharit, calls him a Chagatai Chakravartin. That is Chagatai, descendant of Genghis Khan, and Chakravartin, of course, the ideal Hindu ruler, and he speaks of him as an avatar of Vishnu, but also as a kind of equal of Vishnu, because in one of his couplets, he talks of Lakshmi sharing sharing her time between Vishnu and Akbar. Of Akbar, so part of this, of course, was this sort of asceticism and frugality, and so therefore, of Akbar, Abul Fazl would write that if His Majesty did not possess so lofty a mind, so comprehensive an understanding, so universal a kindness, he would have chosen the path of solitude and given up sleep and food altogether. Not so with Jahangir. Jahangir is unabashedly fond of food and drink. He is the emperor as an aesthete, as a connoisseur. He enjoys his food. For example, he's very fond of fish, and particularly of rohu fish, which he calls the very best kind of fish in Hindustan. Once on his way from Mandu to Gujarat, Jahangir has not been able to eat rohu fish for almost a year, and then one of his commanders, a chap called Rai Man, catches a tasty rohu. One was caught today, writes Jahangir in his diary. I really enjoyed it and gave Rahman a horse as a reward. He's also very fond of mangoes. So every year, mangoes from all over the country, the Deccan, Burhanpur, Gujarat, Malwa, will arrive at his port. But of course, because Jahangir is a connoisseur, and like all mango lovers, he has one particular mango that he thinks is the best. He says for juiciness, tastiness, and digestibility, the mangoes of Chapramau in the Agra vicinity are the best of all Hindustan. There are also things he doesn't want to eat. Khichdi, for example. When he gets to Gujarat, he falls ill, and his advisors tell him to eat khichdi instead of drinking wine. But he doesn't want to. He says, no matter how hard they tried to get me to drink some lentil and rice soup, I couldn't make myself do it. He said he hadn't had to eat khichdi since he was a child, and he wished never to have to eat it again. This is a painting, incidentally, of Jahangir looking at Akbar. And you can see there Akbar is dressed in very ascetic garb, in very clear contrast to Jahangir. Again, in contrast to Akbar, if Akbar thought of the empire as something that he was consolidating under his persona, under his administration, but Jahangir, Hindustan is kind of like a giant picnic spot. Once he travels from Ajmer to Mandu, he and Noor Jahan. It takes them 46 days of marching and 78 days of halting. So, any beautiful spot that catches their eye, they stop. Once they camp in Chambal, by the Chambal River, for 3 days, because the place was so lovely and the weather was so delightful. Every day we got in boats, hunted waterfowl, and toured up and down the river. Not once, writes Jahangir, were they tired or uncomfortable. It was as if we were progressing from garden to garden. Uh, Meanwhile, the ruined palaces of Mandu have been refurbished and repaired for the royal couple. And it's in one of these pavilions that Noor Jahan organizes a beautiful party, such a wonderful party. In fact, the Jahangir renames the day. It was held in a pavilion in the center of a lake. There was wine, there was all kinds of meats, fruits being served. And as night fell, Jahangir writes, lanterns and torches were lit around the lake and the pavilion. All the torches and lanterns were reflected in the water and made it look as though the water was a field of flame. What an incredible party. As it happens, this Thursday was also the day of two festivals, Shab-e-Barat and Rakhi. And Jahangir's own accession to the throne happened on a Thursday. So he decided, I will rename the day entirely. From then on, it's referred to as Mubarak Shamba, that is blessed day. And this waterside partying becomes a sort of fixture in Jahangir's calendar. This is a painting of Jahangir being entertained by Noor Jahan. The person next to Jahangir is a young Khurram, the future Shah Jahan. This is not that Mandu party. This is a garden in Agra. But still, in Jahangir's time, also this question of what you eat, what you don't eat, who you eat with, who you don't eat with, continues to define, but in slightly different ways in the emperor himself. So Jahangir, is a rationalist in the way that he presents himself, and he has no particular objection. Also, he's not inherently he doesn't. He's not a particularly religious person. He's not, he's not ritualistic, not religious, and he has no particular objection, for example, to eating pork. I mean, there's no record of him eating it himself. I would not be surprised if he had tasted it, but he's certainly very fond of gifting pigs to any Christian that came into his realm. That same Thomas Roe, the ambassador from England, actually complains, that Jahangir just keeps sending him wild hogs and not giving him any trading concessions. But there are things that he will not. For example, he writes about how he only ate fish with scales. But he insists that it has nothing to do with the Islamic, and he says specifically Shia, but I think it's also, I think biblical and Jewish texts also have the same prohibition against eating fish without scales. But he says that Shias don't know why they don't eat fish without scales or why it is haram. He says he himself, he has got to the bottom of the matter, and he says fish without scales eat carrion, and therefore they are repugnant to me. But it is the same rationalist Jahangir who, when he is introduced to the Magh people of the Arakan kingdom, which is sort of roughly Myanmar, and he realizes that they eat every part of every kind of sea and land animal, and that in their religion nothing is forbidden, and they eat with anyone, derides them as a bunch of animals that look like human beings. The idea of purity of food and company are so deeply ingrained in the emperor and his world that sullying someone could even be a form of punishment. So he talks about this provincial prince called Kalyan, who has a gypsy Muslim lover, and he kills her parents, perhaps because they don't approve of the match. And so Jahangir orders his tongue cut off and condemns him to eating the rest of his meals with dog keepers and outcasts. Uh, I'm coming now to the end of this talk, and perhaps going back to where it more or less began, not to Babur's home in Fargana, but to Kabul. In the early years of his reign, Jahangir went to Kabul, and partly he went to, because Babur is buried there. He went to pay his respects, and there were many enchantments to Kabul. There were the gardens, there were the pavilions, there were the wonderful views of the mountains, and of course there was the fruit. There was all that melons that Babur had enjoyed and missed. There were grapes, there were apricots, there were peaches, there were cherries. These particular cherries Akbar had named Shah Alu, King Cherry, and Jahangir describes them as hanging like butterflies, chunks of round rubies suspended from the branch. He used to love to go and pick them himself. Once he ate 150 of them at a go. And this is, what Babur had missed most during his brief rule in India. The cool streams, the shady trees, the crisp and juicy fruit. Once in Hindustan, he had written that when a mango is good, it is really good, but his true love was always the melon. And now, there is Jahangir, three-fourths, his great grandson Jahangir. Uh, and with the kind of perfect mirroring that can only happen in real life, Jahangir, I think, writes the one sentence that says more than a dozen books about how Indian the Mughals had become. He says, the excellence of the fruits of Kabul notwithstanding, not one is as delicious as the mango. And here is the this is a painting, sort of an imaginary painting of an imaginary scene in which Jahangir is meeting Shah Abbas of Iran, and at his feet there are trays of fruit, and on this side, on the left, there are sort of temperate fruits, melons, peaches, apricots, that kind of thing, and on the right are the fruits of India, and you can clearly see mangoes, maybe even beeches on that tree. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Wow. I don't know about everyone else, but I am certainly very hungry right now. Each of these pictures and words of yours have really brought in, talked so much about food and food of the past and such vivid descriptions. So, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Let me run some of the questions. So, you know, you began by showing us a painting where Babur is returning home drunk on the horse, and it's painted white to reflect that. It's interesting. So, are these paintings literally being done live, or very very quickly after the event has happened, or are these being recreated much later? How did that
No,
work?
it depends. So this one is created much later because Babur, of course, didn't have time. He wrote his memoirs later on whenever he could, but I don't know if he ever had the time to have them painted or illustrated. It was much later during Akbar's rule that Abdur Rahim Khane Khana actually translates it into from Chagatai Turki to Persian, and Akbar has it illustrated. So these illustrations would be from that time. But that doesn't mean that sometimes they would be painted. Like Jahangir was a great patron of art, and he's forever surrounded by painters, and he really prides himself. There's a part of him as the aesthete emperor, he prides himself on his knowledge of art. And in the Jahangir Nama, you constantly have one of the recurring phrases is, I summoned the painters. If he sees anything that he likes, he summons the painters. And once, this is my favorite sort of anecdote, is he sees this one of his noblemen, one of his courtiers, is a man called Inayat Khan. He's very very ill, and he comes to ask Jahangir for leave. And Jahangir gives him leave. He also gives him some money. He says, "Yes, yes, you look very ill. You must go." But he also says that I had never seen a man on the verge of death like he was, you know. And so, of course, he summoned the painters. So before this chap was let go, and it's a fantastic painting. If you look it up, it's available online. The dying Inayat Khan, it's really very sort of powerful depiction.
Wow. How they missed a good camera at the times.
Yes, really. And Jahangir would have been Instagram king. He would have he loved.
So, Naveen has a question saying Baburnama was written in Chagatai, like you said. Did you read it in Chagatai, or did you read a translation from that to Persian to English? And are the verses also in a recitation form wherever you read it?
Yeah, I know. I mean, Chagatai, I don't know how many people can read anymore. I'm not even sure if the Chagatai exists any longer. It's the Persian that exists. You know, even that's also interesting because along with changing tastes, there are changing languages. So when Jahangir goes to Kabul at that time, he also writes that, you know, I was able to read the Chagatai. He reads the Baburnama and he's very pleased by that fact. But one or two generations down the line, they can't anymore. Persian has become the main language. So the Persian translation is the one that exists, but no, I have read only in translation. There are two translations, one by W.M. Thaxton and one by Annette Beveridge. And both of them have translated the verses in different ways. So I've sometimes chosen from one, sometimes from the other, depending on which one I like.
So lots of compliments coming your way. Radhika says she loved the interpretation. And Parag has a question saying, and I think this is a question that everyone has thought of, and there was a mention of ice as well, saying, did they have access to ice in Humayun's time? And did the Mughals ever use camels for transportation, rather, apart from
Oh, yeah.
cows?
Yes,
For
yes, camels all the time. Camels they use for camels. In fact, they were familiar with because camels were there in Kabul also. You know those Bactrian, those double-humped camels were also there. And there's a very nice scene. It's quite well known from one of these many battles that these guys keep having, Kamran and Humayun, and one raids the other raids the one, and in one of them, Humayun he carries, you know, in these battles, these are nomadic sort of, you
Hmm.
know, sometimes people. So everyone travels together, the women, the camels, the library also. So there are two or three camels in which Humayun's books are kept. And so these are taken by Kamran in one battle, but in another battle they come back. So he's very pleased when he sees these camels coming towards him. And later on, also in Hindustan, in India, also they are very much the one of the for transportation and for riding into battle. Also, there's this fantastic one of his great feats, Akbar's, is when he rides from Fatehpur Sikri to Ahmedabad in 9 days non-stop. It's 900 kilometers. He does it in 9 days, and he rides a she camel for
Hmm.
that journey. And as for ice, during Humayun's time, I don't know whether he had very much time. Babur, of course, complained about it. I think Akbar then manages to get a flow of ice going, especially once he's got Kashmir. You know, so then the ice is transported down, and when his capital is shifted to Lahore, it's much easier. So the ice comes down by boat, and Abul Fazl writes it down by the price and how much ice comes, and you know, when it's available.
And food, are camels food for them?
To eat,
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't. I'm trying to think whether I have come across any camel recipes. I don't think so, but I could check. I can't say for sure.
So you not don't recall a mention of that.
I don't recall a mention of eating camels. No.
I think Akbar would have been a very, a lot of self control with the kind of food that he had available, and yet chose to eat only one meal a day, and yet chose to eat lesser than his appetite. So I
Yes,
probably that he would have been a very fit guy, and then of course, then the vegetarianism must have added to sort of
of
a better
course.
diet.
Yes, part of it is, of course, what he's showing to the world. You know, this is also it's always half
Projection.
reality, half projection, and why he's trying to show himself this way.
I think you mentioned something about Hindu eating, and Radhika wants to know whether that was a Dutch person.
That was a Dutch person. Yes. And as I said, the European travelers, the thing is, because some of these things you will only find in foreigners' accounts because they will notice that because it looks different to them. People who are already here may not even mention it because it is so familiar. So, but of course, the problem is that foreign accounts are not deeply knowledgeable because the Europeans who travel here are not familiar with the customs, not familiar with the language, not familiar with the broader politics or anything, but you can get a sense, of their perceptions and how they see it.
But what is great is that, these kings wrote journals, because if it wasn't for that, you would have very little insight into their lives. I mean, we still maybe don't have an insight into the public's life, but at least how they led and how they ate and how they conducted themselves comes out so beautiful. Even though, again, like you said, it is part projection, you at least get a sense of what they were doing.
Yes, you do. And if you want a sense of the public's life, actually, there is one sort of journal that exists, a kind of half life. It's called. It's been translated. It's a Jain merchant stroke poet. He's a failed merchant. He prefers to write poetry called Banarsi Das.
Ah,
Uh, and it's been translated. It's a Penguin translation by I think Ruchika Sharma, if I'm not wrong. A very lovely translation and very lovely book. All kinds of little details of everyday life. Also, you get. In it.
wonderful, wonderful. Um, Meera has a question saying that, assuming Delhi was as hot,
Hmm.
though this year has been unprecedented, those battle campaigns, were they taking place during summer as well?
They
And
do.
so, how did they preserve food?
How did they preserve themselves for that matter? Because it could be really, really hot. The Battle of Haldighati that I was talking about, that takes place not in Delhi, that takes place in Haldighati. That is even hotter. It's a desert region, and Badauni, who's one of the historians of Akbar's time, he's a translator in his court. He is part of that battle, and he says that it was so hot. He says that the blood boiled in the skull, and so it would be extremely difficult. And you're wearing armor, and not just you're wearing armor, even the horses and the elephants are wearing armor, and be charging into this heat would have been very difficult. They go in terms of what you would eat. So this battle ends by about noon. It's and The Mughal, the Rana Pratap leaves the battlefield, and so do the Mughals. And the Mughals go to a town called Gogunda. And there, Bradani talks about how he has no, I mean, there was nothing to eat except meat and mangoes. And Badani, he says many people fell ill from this diet, and also because he's a very critical man. Badani, if you read him, you'll know. He says the mango also was not very good mango. So
Interesting. Okay. So lovely art, lots of compliments for you. I'm not naming everyone who's complimented it, but lovely. Jyoti has a question. She wants to know about the medicinal flower that was in bloom that you mentioned right in the beginning.
yes,
I'm quite curious to know what that was.
it's a shrub. Now I don't know. I was actually quite curious myself. So I was looking it up. It might be. It's a kind of rubbery leaf. It's a green leaf, and it's used for it has a sort of slightly tart taste, is what I read. It might be the same as rhubarb, but again, I don't quite know what rhubarb is either. But so it was. I'm not entirely sure what the attraction was of this flower. I think it was not so much to see it, but to eat it, because it was basically a sort of large green leaf that would sprout, and was perhaps good for digestion. That was one of its.
Should
Yeah,
try.
if somebody might know, if Dr. Usha might know, then I would be very keen to. I'm very keen to know from her.
Let's
She
figure out and see if somebody knows about it. If Dr. Usha knows, yeah. Yeah. And of course, like Radhika says, and like you said, they used to transport the glaciers down the rivers and enjoy their sherbet. And on that note, since there are no more questions, I'm going to let everyone go and have their sumptuous meals or start planning for them, because I'd like one very quickly now after this talk.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you all
so
very
much
much for this.
for your talk, and thank you everyone so much for being here, and see you all next Saturday at 6.